I want to say that for the last 20 years, I've been concerned with how teachers and teacher educators learn. And these are at least three big questions that I've wrestled with. I think schools should be a worthwhile place to be. And I think they should be worthwhile both for teachers and for students. I think about how do we create learning environments that get us inside practice, because of course teaching is complex. And you can't learn it just by thinking about it. And I want to think about working with students as people and as learners, and how you learn to do that is really hard work. And how you actually design ways for us to work together and learn together as grown-ups is equally hard. There is a political agenda that I don't always talk about as a scholar because it's in my personhood, but maybe not what I've been trained to write about. And yet I think when I think about why I do the work that I do, it's because I do want schools to play a different role for many students than they have, which is basically to determine what they can and can't do in life, how and why and what they can contribute to society. So given that, let me kind of just introduce this idea of situativity or situatedness. And Jim Greeno, he says that when we use the term situated, we can invite misconceptions, that some instances of action, cognition, or learning are situated and others are not. So in what follows, as I state some of the basic premises of this perspective, he uses situative to suggest that there are not some things that are situated and other things that aren't. So he says that the main focus of analysis is on performance and learning by an activity system, right? So when we're trying to analyze learning from a situative perspective, we're trying to think about what is happening in a particular setting and how actors are engaged with one another and what's influencing their actions, which I think also would necessitate that you pay attention to the histories that are informing those experiences. So because our understandings, our goals, our intentions, our expectations are shaped by joint action, there's three kinds of things that you do when you try to understand learning from a situative perspective, and that is to analyze collaborative discourse, to notice and study the way we position ourselves and are positioned in participant structures of interaction, and the way that learning is visible as well as knowledge in the representation and the representational practices that we use. So let's think about the activity setting that I've created in methods and what that means. I think it's important to share the principles for teaching that we try to enact and negotiate with our students. These are the ones that are straight out of my syllabus, and they've also morphed over time, and I have to thank my colleague Elizabeth Dutro, who teaches writing instruction at Boulder, for some of the revisions in the wording. But first of all, we think that teachers must position students as sense makers and knowledge generators who desire to invest and succeed in school. This involves noticing children, building relationships with them, their families and communities, valuing their perspectives, and attending to their thinking, curiosities, and capabilities. Teaching is both intellectual work and a craft. Deep knowledge of content, pedagogy, creativity, and passion fuel both learning and teaching. And maybe now I would add more explicitly political consciousness. Teachers must design equitable learning environments in which all children are engaged in robust and consequential learning. And teachers' instruction and student learning is always conducted within the context of larger social systems, structures, and hierarchies. And we have to consider those as we figure out how to act and why to act. What we do and say matters and must be analyzed. Our language and our action constructs or constrains opportunities for children to build meaningful, positive, and sustained relationships to learning and to one another. So in some ways, this is a little bit of us saying in this methods class, these are the things that we're going to worry about. And you have to think about those as you learn how to teach math. And it's caring about them and teaching subject matter really well. And thinking about why school, what is the purpose of schooling in this thing we call a democracy? And what is democracy anyway, right? It's important work that we do. And we want schools to be a place of possibility. I do believe that. I have to believe that, right? because they're not right now. So one of the things that's really important about learning to teach is to make these ideas public. And what's hard is that I don't really want to say, here's what Elham thinks and you need to think like me. But what I do want to provide for my students is to say, we're in a project of building a community, not just with ourselves in this class, but actually with educators that are thinking about why they do what they do. And it is intellectual work. To teach, to actually be interested in learning, is intellectual work, and it requires specialized knowledge. It's more than just being a student yourself of the subject matter. It is about being a student of your students. Making teaching public and experimenting and being playful and talking about what we learn and what's hard is really important to our work. So I'm going to tell you the story of our class through a set of images. My math methods class actually takes place at an elementary school. This is a 3rd grade class. We only work with one class of students, and it's hard. It takes a lot of hours to logistically pull this off, and I used to try to do it with several teachers, and it's easier to do it with one, and it's easier to do it for just 1 quarter because you're asking a lot of your students and the program. We are there for 4 hours from 8:30 to 12:30, and then they're kind of done for the day. It's pretty tiring work, so they don't have any other classes. So one of the things I just want you to see with these images is that we're very playful. And as we're teaching mathematics, we also do all kinds of team building exercises and spontaneous things. So as our class gets underway, our central activity is learning to teach and co-planning and then co-teaching a set of instructional activities that are usually selected by me. That's my job as the teacher, to select things that I think are good starting places for us to talk about the work of teaching. We write protocols for them, and one of the things that I don't know in the field is if people think of these as like rigid scripts that then we tell people exactly how to teach, and it's not like that at all. It's sort of taking this idea, like Andrew's estimation 180, and saying if you're going to teach these estimation tasks, what's the lesson design around that? So we have a few that we've played with. We care a lot about children's understanding of number. So choral counting, which is something that Megan Franke sort of invented at UCLA, and we've developed as one that we use. Quick images, which is in lots of different math curricula. Mental math, sort of like number talks. We try to find things that are accessible, easy enough to teach well in 20 to 30 minutes, and that people could see teaching across all grade levels and regardless of whatever the adopted curriculum is. And that's really why we choose the particular ones. But I also try to bring new things into the context because I want to experiment with stuff and I want to put myself in a position of learner with them. So I don't have everything figured out. So what happens when they show up for class is that they've learned in a 2-day institute, they've gotten a kind of an overview of the ones we're going to work on for the quarter. And then the first day at White Center Heights, they've kind of come in with an initial plan. And this is a group of about 8 students, and there's a teacher educator who works with each of them. So there's me, there's the classroom teacher, there's our TA for the class, and then usually, and this is how I push on program structures, I say to do this well, I need another grown-up who's a teacher educator. So I also play the game and change the game. I know we're not supposed to have a second person, but I just need a person that I can rely on for 5 hours. Can we pay them? Can we figure out a way to do that? So sometimes it's one of my graduate students who's a TA or a literacy TA who we work with, but it also broadens who we're working with and who we're in conversation with. So our students are being supervised not just by math ed graduate students, right, by everybody. So this is in part some of my attempts, little by little, to grow the network of people who have shared experiences, who want to work on issues of teaching and learning, and also want to think about connection. So the classroom teacher, when we sort of complain about not having good mentor teachers or the right kinds of mentor teachers, I have been convinced by Jamie Stillman to kind of turn that problem on its head and say, what we have to do is put ourselves in situations where we can learn together. Instead of thinking we have to wait for the perfect mentor teacher in order for our students to have good experiences out in the field. So when they come in, we rehearse the activity that they are about to teach the kids. And Rehearsals are, again, I don't know what the image is just from reading a couple of articles, but rehearsals are not just a run-through, but because we have a shared lesson plan, as they try stuff, we interrupt each other. We give permission to interrupt and say, okay, what I noticed is that took you 5 minutes to get the kids started. I mean, sometimes there are logistical things like that. Or what are you going to write on the board? I mean, there's things as a novice teacher that you are hard to do because you can't track all of those things. But the other important thing about me being in that space with them is that I finally understand and see how they're interpreting and making sense of the ideas that they're introduced to, often quite briefly, actually, right? So this gives us another chance to build that shared understanding together. And we also put ourselves always in the role of trying stuff out and getting feedback. So it's not just one directional. It's not teacher-educator as expert, but teacher-educator as a more knowledgeable other. I do have more experience teaching these things than the teachers do, but they're also not blank slates. This is sort of what a plan might look like for the day. This is a planning template. We try to do realistic planning. Like if you were actually going to teach counting by fours, what would the real plan look like on a piece of paper? We do this thing that we've learned from working with practicing teachers called teacher timeout. So if in the middle of the lesson I have a question about a move, or I notice something, or Ryan notices something, we'll actually pause in the middle of the lesson in front of the kids and have a very brief, like 20-second conversation about, should we do this next? Or I heard so-and-so say this, can we have him share? And we kind of do that in front of them. Again, to show that teaching isn't perfect. You're making all kinds of decisions in the moment. And the kids realize that you are also very interested in learning from them. So it's another way of demonstrating that this is not about perfection, but it's about responsiveness and considering what your content is in relation to what you see the students doing. So sometimes we have this whole group experience. Then we break up into those teams of 8. So this is my team again with their students now teaching their activity. This is elementary school, so we're smushed on the ground. But all of these adults have what they're called Husky Buddies because of the Husky mascot. And so each of the students has their special Husky buddy who they love and adore. And they do team building activities with them each time that we're there. But they also have personal chit-chat time before and after our lessons. And then we always invite the students to the University of Washington for a field trip when we leave them at the end of the quarter. So, and talk to them about where we go to school. So these are just images of us talking and enacting this lesson. And then we come back into the classroom after a break and debrief what we saw. And one of the things we're doing a little differently this year is the way we're structuring the debriefing. This is an image of the handout that we use, but the questions that you can't read up there is that for each student, we kind of reflect back on what did each student do or say during that lesson, and what do we think they seem to be understanding. We kind of talk about the questions we have about that particular student's ideas or the group, and then we say, okay, so what did we learn about our group, and what do we want to keep in mind for next time? And this is both socially and intellectually. What are we noticing about their participation? That basic cycle. After we're done with our debriefing, we have about an hour left for class. So all that I just described takes about 3 hours, and we have the last hour to prep for the next week. And that's how methods goes. So let me go back to thinking about understanding learning from a situated perspective. So remember, one thing that we have to do is to think about the discourse that happens in these settings. And so the back and forth about what do we know about kids intellectually and socially, I think is part of what they're learning. What is the work of teaching? That you are concerned with what the mathematics is that you're teaching them, but also how the kids are positioned in relation to that mathematics and with one another. And what I think you'll see is that we are treating teaching as complex work that isn't routine or specified, and yet we use routines and particular specifications because they are the representational structures that get us into all of this complexity. Not in a way to say, so you must do this, but what are the contextual situations that would make, get you to make this decision versus another. So that's a lot of like general talk about what's going on. But let me try to provide with a few images a specific example of a lesson. So we draw on CGI frameworks for children's thinking, which may come as no surprise to you. But one of the things I try to help them learn is that problems are really important as a way to understand both about number and operations. So that this day we're talking about a problem that one of the things we want to learn about how to pose word problems is the work that you do when you pose a problem to help kids enter the problem situation, right? There's lots written in the research literature about launching and opening and not lowering the cognitive demand. And so the third graders were learning multiplication. We usually pick problems that fit with what the third graders or whatever class we're working with is doing. And this is the problem that the teacher and I selected for the day. What we've done a little bit differently on this day is that they're just learning about this, and it's a lot to take on, a 5 practices approach where you launch and you anticipate and you monitor. So what we're doing this day is that one of my TAs, Allison Fox, is actually going to do the launch for the whole class. So this is the first time they're seeing a launch of a word problem. So she's going to do it with the whole class. Then the kids are going to solve the problem in their teams, individually. And our students, the pre-service teachers, will monitor. That's when they'll come in. They'll monitor what the kids are doing. And then they'll break. 2 of their teammates will lead the kids in a team building activity for the day, while the 2 lead teachers huddle with me or whoever their teacher educator is to look at the student work and make a decision about what to focus the discussion on. And they're learning a particular form of a discussion structure, which I call compare and connect. So what I want them to do is select 2 strategies that the kids have worked on, decide what mathematically they want to try to focus the discussion on, and then try to hold that discussion. And then the kids come back and we hold that discussion. The following week, they're going to do the whole thing themselves. But this week, we're doing a little bit of it together so that we have a shared experience. And what's the understanding that we want them to have about multiplication and how it behaves? So that's what we talk about afterwards, and our success in facilitating that conversation around those ideas and what we might need to do next, what we feel the kids might be secure about, what we might do to trouble some of that in the next posing of a problem. And then what I think is really exciting about being a teacher educator in all of this is that I'm constantly having to learn and try stuff out myself. And it can be very humbling because you do all of this work and then you go out into the field, which is actually another thing that is still difficult, right? How do you translate between this activity system, which is actually entirely designed to help them work together, take risks, pay attention closely to students, and so it works that way because in some ways it's a closed system, right? And everything they do supports that way of participating in the teaching and learning of mathematics. But our schools are not organized like that. So one of the things we've tried to do is to change our supervision model, and I do this a little bit at a time. So one of the things that we experiment with is we've tried to get our coaches, who in our context used to be retired classroom teachers, but now they are graduate students. I would do it the same, is that we have events in our placement schools. Last year, for example, one of the things I did is I canceled 6 of my classes. I said, I think that if I go out into the school placements, instead of holding class on campus, and met with everybody who was at that school. So we've tried to put like 4 to 6 students at a school. And we designed some lessons together that they're actually going to teach that day. But instead of all of them doing it individually and just getting some feedback from their mentor teachers, we'll design those lessons together and then we'll try them out in each of your, or at least in 2 different classes, so you get to see 2 different grades. We'll invite the mentor teachers to be part of that process with us when we're in their classrooms, and we'll invite the supervisor and the principal at that school. So it's in these ways that we're trying to change our own behavior as teacher educators and also change the dyadic models that are more common in teacher preparation, where you have your courses and then you have student teaching, and you're, good luck. So just last year, I began this idea of bringing together a group of alumni from our programs to say, if you had the opportunity to start to design experiences where you got to share what you've gotten good at, and also what you wanted to learn more about, what would that look like? And how could we start something so that we use summertime learning more strategically? And so we had our first little mini pilot, and we got about 30 people to have a 4-day institute together where they wanted to talk about smart uses of technology in the classroom. And they partnered with this group in Seattle that runs summer camps for girls called Girls Rock Math. And they kind of followed the same lab idea where they'd learn about something, they got some experts to come in and talk to them, they got some other teachers to come in and talk to them, they'd learn about it, they'd design it together, and then they would try it out with the kids that were there at that camp, and made some commitments to what they were going to try to continue to do together. And I think it's those little kinds of ways that we grow a profession that is better connected rather than isolated. And that's in part what I think we're trying to do at the beginning of Math Methods.